15% or so. And now inflation seems to be coming back. Mohammed Al-Alarian, who used to be the head of the Harvard Endowment, thinks it's going into double digits. It's 8% in February. He thinks it's going much higher. So given your experience with inflation and working with Carter and Paul Volcker, how do you think Chairman Jeremy Powell should deal with inflation today? Do you think that the Fed is giving, did give too little, too late? What do you think are the best policy measures for this?
Well, Jay Powell used to work at Carlyle. I hired him when he left the government many years ago. And, I think he's a really smart, articulate person. I think he would say today that probably the word transitory was a mistake when he said that inflation was transitory. I think the Fed economists would say that today that it's a little bit more embedded in the system than the Fed had realized. And that's why the Fed is likely to have 6 rate increases this year. But none of those rate increases will be as dramatic as what Paul Volcker did. When Paul Volcker was appointed chairman of the Fed by Jimmy Carter, when we already had high inflation, over one weekend, Paul Volcker increased the federal discount rate by 200 basis points, which is gigantic. And eventually, it did produce the desired effect. Inflation went down, so did the GDP, and therefore we went into a recession, and Carter's reelection chances were really hurt by that. At the current situation, I don't see a recession in the near future. However, nobody predicted the Russia-Ukraine economic situation or military situation, so you can't predict these geopolitical events. Clearly, the energy inflation we're having, the food inflation is really having a big effect on the CPI. I suspect that 8% is probably a high, and I suspect that it's probably going to come down. But for the year, I wouldn't be surprised if you had 4 to 5% inflation for the year. Again, if Russia-Ukraine goes on for a long time and energy prices keep going up, it could be higher than that. But I don't see it going to double digit. I don't see that. It's a different economy than we had in the 70s. It's a much different type of economy.
Well, both have in common that energy prices have skyrocketed. Now, of course, it went up a lot more under Carter's years than currently, and our energy economy is much more diversified than it was in the past, and we're not so dependent anymore.
It was a different situation. We were much more dependent on foreign oil in those days than we are today. We're more self-sufficient, not completely, but more self-sufficient than we were then. One of the problems, though, is because energy prices and oil prices were down for a fair bit the last couple of years, a lot of the drillers just plugged up their holes and didn't drill for a while, because you probably need oil to be at a more consistently high rate for some of the fracking to get done. And so we're actually probably not producing as much as we could produce. We probably could produce 11 million barrels a day, maybe even more than that if we really had to, but we're not producing that right now. So we're a little bit more dependent on foreign pricing than we probably should be. And one of the bigger problems is that the big drilling projects that often take 5, 10, 15 years to come to fruition, a lot of them have been closed down permanently by the big drillers because they don't think that in the end they're going to get the price in the future. At least they hadn't thought they were going to get the price in the future. So we don't really know. The oil shock that we first had, and people should remember this, when we had the Arab war with Israel, the so-called Yom Kippur War in 1973, the United States sided with Israel, and there was a boycott of the United States, and as a result of that and other things, oil prices went up 400%, not 4%, 400%. And so the shock to the system was unbelievable. And that's what helped begin to fuel the double-digit inflation, which we began to see really in the mid to late 70s. We're not going to have that kind of energy rate increase now, but there's no doubt that it's likely not to go down to $40 a barrel again anytime soon.